Hi everyone, welcome back to the weekly study. I'm glad that you're joining with us. We're going to continue in our study. We've been studying the book of Genesis, and now we are in the midst of chapter 29. We've been focusing for the last couple of weeks on the story of Jacob. Jacob journeying onto his own, running away from his family after he's stolen the birthright. Remember, at the beginning of chapter 29 is the dream of the ladder. Jacob dreams of the ladder, and then that was 2 weeks ago, and then last week we studied about the scene at the well where Jacob meets Rachel at the well. This week, Jacob is going to be introduced to a new character, Lavan, that is Rebekah's brother. And so Lavan is going to kind of bring Jacob into his home, and eventually Jacob is going to seek to marry Lavan's two daughters, Rachel and Leah. But we'll learn all about that in just a bit. So let's stay tuned as we read through the next few verses of chapter 29 and then begin to discuss and talk about them together. Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman, that he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. On hearing the news of his sister's son Jacob, Lavan ran to greet him. He embraced him and kissed him and took him into his house. He told Lavan all that had happened. And Lavan said to him, "You are truly my bone and flesh." When he had stayed with him a month's time, Lavan said to Jacob, "Just because you are a kinsman, should you serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Now Laban had two daughters. The name of the older one was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, Rachel was shapely and beautiful. Jacob loved Rachel, so he answered, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter, Rachel." Lavan said, "Better that I give her to you than that I should give her to an outsider. Stay with me." So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of his love for her. So we pick up again with the story of Jacob. Remember, now that he's finally met Rachel, or he's met Rachel at the well, he tells her of his lineage. He shares with her his family background. You can imagine it's like we're on a first date here. And you kind of tell the person that's sitting across the maybe the coffee table from you, or the restaurant diner, about yourself, where you grew up, what your family is like, maybe where you went to school. And that's what they were doing. Jacob was saying to Rachel, about his connection to his mother Rebekah and to Rachel as well. Remember, in the ancient world, this is the family connections. The closer they are, actually, the better it seems they are, right? Obviously, that's a little bit different nowadays, but that was important back then. So on hearing the news, right, Rachel runs back home, and Lavan comes to greet him. He embraces him, he kisses him, he takes him into his house. Seemingly on the surface of it, it seems like Lavan, or as most of us in English language call him, Laban, but Lavan is in the Hebrew, so I'll probably just be sticking to that pronunciation. He seems like an okay guy, but what we know just from the rest of the story and our interactions with Lavan is that he's a trickster. He's not such a trustworthy character, but at first glance it doesn't seem that he seems to be okay. Remember, we've actually met Lavan before, back in chapter 24, when Abraham sent his servant out to find a wife for Isaac, and then remember remember the servant had that whole bit about, if I meet the person by the well and they offer the water for the camels and the family and me, etc., right, that's going to be the right person, right? Then we actually meet Lavan back then, when at that point Rebekah comes back to her house and says, "Hey, I've met someone." So remember, we actually met him before. And Jacob then tells Lavan all that's happened. Perhaps everything that in his life history is kind of catching him up on the family stories and what's been going on until now. And Lavan then says to him, "You are truly my bone and my flesh." What do we make of that? Lavan sees himself, well, they clearly are family. So they are, in a sense, a certain type of bone and flesh connection in terms of a kind of a bloodline of a family. Perhaps what we can take here, and what has led some commentaries to also offer this suggestion, is that it's a little bit more than that. In hearing about Jacob's story and the cunning and trickery that he's used to procure the birthright, perhaps Lavan sees some of himself in Jacob. And that is saying, hey, you are just like me, you are cunning like me. So maybe that's our first warning of, watch out, Jacob. Lavan is not going to be such a trustworthy character. So he's there, and he stays there for a month's time, and then Lavan says to Jacob, what should we do now? It's, you've been here, you're my kinsman, but in some ways you're also my servant. And I think this points to the ambiguous relationship that they have. Jacob is there. Jacob is looking for a place of shelter and of dwelling. Clearly in the back of his mind, he's also interested in marrying Lavan's daughter, Rachel. But so on the one hand, he's there because he needs help and connection and clothing, and that is, Lavan gives him that because he's his family. But on the other hand, he's working for him. He's a servant in that way. And so this kind of ambiguous relationship, this kind of tension around the boundaries of their relationship, is going to come up again and again. It'll come up in next week when we study about kind of the marriages that Jacob hopes to make with Lavan's daughters. But until now, it's just important to notice that ambiguous relationship. And I think that is important in our kind of own lesson as we think in ways that we can relate to the texts. There are probably many times in our lives when we've noticed the ambiguous nature of relationships in our lives. Where did we set the boundaries with another person? In what ways did we only realize later that we should have said something, or that we should have kind of said something in advance to kind of create a certain type of understanding? And here, this is just points to that fact that it already exists. It already exists back in chapter 29 of Genesis, that boundaries around relationships are really important, especially family. Right? Jacob is seen by Lavan as, is he related to me? Is he my servant? Right? Just because you're my kinsman, should you serve me for nothing? What should your wages be? And we can kind of hear in Lavan's words a sense of like a kind of maybe a chumminess, like a jokey joke, like, we're together, like, what do you mean? Tell me what your wages are. But we could also hear it in a little bit more serious. So what are your wages going to be? You're working for me. You are my servant, right? I am the Lord over you. It's already, again, beginning to be concerned and worried about their relationship. And then that's when we learn that not just of Rachel, but of Leah as well, right? Lavan has two daughters. The older is Leah, and the younger is Rachel. Again, this is what Genesis loves to do. We cannot get away from the fact that there are siblings, and there are older siblings, and there are younger siblings, and guess what? There's always going to be conflict. So, unsurprisingly, Jacob is drawn to Rachel, the younger one. Again, constantly, right? Jacob is the younger one. Isaac is the younger one, right? We're always following the younger ones here in this story. And then we learn about not just that there's an older and younger, but that Leah has weak eyes, and Rachel has shapely and beautiful eyes. So on the surface of it, it's seeming to say that that Rachel is more attractive than Leah is. But what's interesting, if we think about it, is about not just the physical distinctions, but in many ways we've learned now that Jacob is kind of drawn to the physical, right? And he's so taken. Remember last week that he's so taken with Rachel's beauty that he kisses her and that he cries. And again, Jacob is drawn to Rachel, but perhaps it's unclear what it means when Leah has weak eyes. Does it mean weak, or in the original Hebrew, does it mean that the eyes are tender? There's something a little bit more nuanced, deep, special about her eyes that aren't these, she's not beautiful and strikingly beautiful in the way that Rachel is, but she's a little bit more tender. It can make us think also about the distinction between physical connection versus a kind of a connection of the soul, an emotional connection. Sometimes we are so blinded by beauty and the outward beauty of someone that we draw to them, we're attracted to them without necessarily thinking about who they are as a person. And whereas, here Leah has these perhaps weak eyes or tender eyes, perhaps that means that her soul is a little bit more blessed, a little bit more thorough or thoughtful. So that's just something interesting to posit already, that there's this kind of difference between the physical exterior versus the interior, the beauty versus the physical beauty versus the soul. And then again, Lavan has this, ambiguous type of response that he says, "Better that I give her to you than that I should give her to an outsider." Is it better or is it not? If that's what Lavan is saying, he's also saying, maybe I shouldn't give her to you. So again, he's not outwardly effusive in his approval or praise of Jacob. And it's so interesting. Then Lavan says, "Stay with me," and so Jacob's served for 7 years for Rachel, and he stays with him. One commentary points out that unlike when Jacob was made Esau swear about the birthright. Remember, Esau comes in from the field and he's tired, and Jacob's making that pottage of stew and wants some, and so Jacob makes him swear by his birthright that he'll receive it for that stew. Here, they have this deal between Jacob and Lavan for Rachel, his daughter, but he doesn't make him swear. And we're going to learn by next week that he's already going to end up tricking him and not follow through with the deal. And then there's a really beautiful verse that finishes up our study for today. Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of his love for her. That's just a beautiful expression of what it means to be in love. That when you're in love and that you care for someone so deeply, things just fly by. Things that might be inconveniences or difficulties just fall away and don't really seem to be that way anymore. And so I imagine, or I hope, that each of us has had that experience in our lives, where we have felt such a deep connection and love for someone, that what we gave for them, even if it was the equivalent of 7 years of work, really just seemed to us like a few days because of our love. Okay, thank you for joining me. I'm glad that you continue to tune in and study with us, and we'll pick up with it and continue next week. All right, have a great day, everyone.